It's an interesting time. A lot of companies right now are facing tough decisions, right? CMOs and other senior leaders are facing tough decisions on where to maintain budget, where to cut budget. It's really striking a fine line between short-term and long-term thinking. And Mike, you might have had a gift of prophecy here. I had a prophetic inspiration back in 2009, I think it is, where you wrote a really interesting piece for Forbes on this very topic. And I want to talk about that. I want to talk about maintaining brand integrity, the craft. Why don't you walk us through it? And for our audience, the link will be below. So you guys can check out this article. It's a great 5-minute read, and I highly recommend it. So why don't you tee us up a little bit, Mike, with what inspired you to write this article, and we'll just take it from there.
Well, thanks. The article's called Why Marketing's Like Making Martinis. And I wrote it at the time because I saw this deconstruction of marketing into individual pieces and a bunch of zero-based budgeting where the concept was each piece should be measured and run on its own. And my real concern there was not that each piece shouldn't be measured or that you shouldn't try and measure all of marketing, but that you're going to deconstruct really how the consumer absorbed the business. That the consumer did not buy individual marketing functions. They bought kind of the whole customer experience and the brand, and trying to understand why they bought that brand and why they came back time after time or didn't come back was super important. But that this was actually putting the company's ROI in place of the consumer's ROI. And so the article deconstructs a martini, and the heaviest working ingredient in martini is either the vodka or the gin, depending on the martini you're making. And in the end, you are reduced to just a shot of gin or a shot of vodka, because that is the most effective part of the martini. But that consumers didn't see it that way. They needed all the elements together to make that whole martini work, including kind of the ambience of the bar. And to me, this was just designed to say, hey, don't put the company ROI in place of the consumer. Try and understand why the consumer does what they do, and then manage the consumer. Don't just manage the ROI and then try and make those meet. And that was the whole point of the article.
I love it. And it really spoke to me. And I think it's one of those timeless pieces you can read now, you can read 10 years from now, because I think that the basic concept is still so true. And Nelson, I know that you work with a lot of CMOs on the agency side, right? And I think the tenure is somewhere between 16 to 18 months. There's a lot of pressure on the CMOs to make great short-term decisions and in some cases be reactionary. How do you try to maintain the craft? How do you try to help them maintain that balance, especially under pressure, under fiscal pressure?
Yeah, I bring it back a little bit always to what Mike just said, where sometimes we all get so caught up in the individual pieces and what those individual pieces are, but that fundamentally is not the way us humans consume a brand, consume our relationship with the brand. It's really the amalgamation and how all those pieces either interlink or add to one another to create a very powerful point of view, a very powerful story for a brand. And I always try and bring it back to a very basic human principle, which is a lot of CMOs or just marketing people talk about, I want to build a relationship with my consumers. Right? Oh, I want to build sustainability. I want them to keep coming back. I want to have this continuous dialogue. Well, you're not going to do that if the work that you're putting out there is not interesting to them, not useful to them, not valuable to them. And they don't, to Mike's point, they don't come back and they experience the totality of it, not just a piece of it. The totality of it is going to give you the relationship. Right? The cumulative effect of it all, not the individual piece. So I bring it back to a very, basic need. We all have relationships with other people, but those have many components. It's not just one thing.
I love you going with that. And John, I know that when we spoke on our last series, you talked about like product marketing, which is really on the cutting edge of marketing, right? Oftentimes with new products and thinking through the marketing strategy, leaving that DNA in the marketing of that product or solution. Being the danger of being treated like short order cooks. Now that was in good times. What does it look like in bad times, right? How do you defend against that?
Yeah, I think, obviously the kind of macro conditions that we're under now, I think we're at risk of forgetting what we've kind of learned over the last 7 or 8 years, which is, yes, the mechanics of demand gen and sort of the marketing math is important, certainly in terms of understanding the ROI and being able to be mechanical about it. But at the end of the day, we've been talking about it. Storytelling is the big differentiator. There's no market in the world that's short on product, right? So we've had, a decade and a half of massive venture capital overhang. Like, there's more software, there's more technology, there's more services than anyone can possibly grapple with. I think the silver bullet in all this is, what's the story? How is, taking a sort of buyer back or customer back perspective, what's compelling about this? How does this map to the things I care about? And what's different about, your offering or your firm? And I think that is, as we talked about, I think that's really at the heart of product marketing, that idea of, whether you're talking about sort of formal positioning statements or, the recent trend around category creation, it's still like, hey, what's the story here? And why should anyone care about your thing in a sea of things, right? So we're not even talking about the limits of kind of last century shelf space. Like, you look at any particular category, it is flooded with companies that, if you abstract away that specialness of storytelling and narrative, it all becomes commodified. And then all of a sudden, you really want to talk about an uphill climb to get revenue. Like, then you're just, battling it out with pure product and Herculean salesperson efforts. Like, to me, that just feels crazy that we would kind of backtrack off that.
Can I say, I think this is super important, because there's this, when you deconstruct all the tools, you end up going to the short-term tools that you can measure, like search. But the real thing is, if there's a lot of competition for that search box, you can't win without a story or by outspending huge amounts of money to stay at the top of the box. But then you still, if you don't have a story, you still have a great chance of losing. And I'm not against the ROI by any means, but I think people have to think, why does the ROI on the short-term tool show up? And it doesn't show up just because the short-term tool is there. Or there will be everyone would immediately go to the best new product available, and that's just not what happens.
Is this a time where it's because of force, maybe because you're forced to cut budgets, where it's a fundamental rethink, where you're like, okay, wait a minute, I'm cutting budgets, but it's a time to get more creative. It's a time to stretch what I've got, if we're talking about the story, right? And so it could be a great way to go back to basics. Are you guys catching my drift here? Like, how much of it is money and how much of it is true creativity, going back to the craft, going back to the original idea, going back to a great story and evolving the story in a time when your budget's under pressure? Is that making sense? Is this a great time to stretch some muscles that maybe haven't been used fully in a while?
Yeah, I mean, I think it prevents kind of budget rollover. The idea, we did this last year, we'll do this again. I think we've all been through this the last few years. I can certainly see things like in-person event budgets. What happens when literally the supply of that isn't available to go and do those things? And all of a sudden, people were getting more creative about engaging people. And then all of a sudden, anything that worked in 2020, the Zoom fatigue by 2021, those tactics had to be rethought. So invariably, I think there's always going to be this sort of creative destruction aspect to how do we get people, how do we build awareness and drive demand? How do we tell a story in the market? But I think, being very narrow in your thinking to say, okay, anything that doesn't have sort of short twitch muscle around immediate measurable, impact to pipeline. I think that is, that is by definition short-term thinking, which I can't imagine in any mode of human thought. Like, hey, actually, short-term thinking is the way to go here. We're all in this for not just quarter to quarter, but year to year, and markets develop over time. So that's sort of what I've seen.
For what it's worth, I always look at this in three different buckets. Actually, the first is I have to do what I can to help the company make its numbers. And that may mean I may have to shift more money into short-term tools because, if you're in a business like retail or something, you really got to make a certain number sometimes. The second thing is I always want my creative working harder because then it's just more effective and better. So I'm always pushing on that. But then the third thing is I will always put up a fight if I think we are cutting what I'll call long-term infrastructure on the business. And that is not infrastructure like a manufacturing plant or something. That is infrastructure with the consumer in terms of how they are connecting with the brand. And it's like people will say, we'll go dark on advertising for a year and then we'll turn it on and we'll coast on the brand. that doesn't really work. You can't turn it on and off because that's not how consumers absorb brands. And so I will try and keep enough of the infrastructure, long-term things in place that I don't completely retreat from the field. And those are the 3 buckets I use.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing I sometimes I like to emphasize, like sometimes in my role, I'm a little bit slightly powerless when it comes to a client saying, we got to move everything to search because we got to make these short-term gains. Sometimes these things aren't mutually exclusive, that sometimes get overlooked, which is, okay, if you're going to the earlier point, the market is flooded with product. The market is flooded with things. It's not like we're left for wanting of choice. No one's sitting around thinking, oh my God, if only I had more of product A. There is hundreds of options. But if you are going to go to search, be very, very thoughtful how it fits into your narrative and your story. Be very, very thoughtful how it's going to sync up with something else in your marketing mix to help that search, to accelerate that search. Be very, very thoughtful as to what you're going to say and what you're going to do when people get there. So everything syncs up with your overall brand and brand purpose. And it's not just this, oh God, I got to just be transactional here and just kind of crank it up, because what you're inevitably going to do is perhaps build the category versus benefiting yourself and your long-term ambition. So think clearly how you're going to use that in service of a bigger brand need, story, equation, because that'll be able to build it in a bigger way rather than just this kind of transactional thing that you got to crank out on.
I love that. John, you spent some time in startup world before you went to some really big companies like Microsoft and Splunk and so forth and so on. In startup world, right, which could mimic a little bit what a recessionary environment looks like if you look at a pre-funded or a very early funded company with regards to resource allocation. Do you see anything in your learnings from those days in protecting the craft? And I like a combination of craft and story. There's something there about your story, your brand. How do you keep the story alive, promoting it? Am I onto something here? Are there some things established organizations can learn from aggressive younger companies?
Yeah, I mean, I think at least in my experience at startups, with kind of earlier on and then sort of later in my career was, you have the sort of the challenge and the blessing of no one really cares about you, right? So there's no huge expectation. You're not fitting into a category that exists. You're not working against expectations. No one's knocking on your door waiting for the next product launch, waiting for your, even your user event. Early days, you're scraping by and you're, like on the corner in New York, handing out tickets to people to show up. So there's tremendous, opportunity there. And again, I think it starts with like, what's the so what here? What is your story? Every as much as every VC pitch deck says, hey, we're changing the world and revolutionizing, like everything is a slightly different, is a better mousetrap. Why is your mousetrap better? And then the tactics becomes, hey, you only have $100. How are you going to spend that $100? Mm-hmm. And I think, the idea of whether that is sort of transactional instances like, hey, we're going to go super hard at search, or we're going to go super hard at ABM because that's what our market looks like. Or really what we're doing is we're seeding, we're going to focus really on content and influencers because we're seeding this mind shift and change. It forces you as a startup company to be like, who are we and who aren't we? So it's that, it's almost sort of like figuring out the negative space. But the difference is there's no expectation. Like there's no 10Q. There's no, the idea of, yes, every, as Mike mentioned earlier, right? Like as go-to-market leaders, we're all tied to our friends in sales. So we all live to a certain degree at 13 weeks at a time, but we also have to have the broader horizon. And I think at a startup, you're doing it in space in a way that you're not necessarily doing it in an established company in an established market.
Well, let me ask this question. Let's say, for example, that I'm a CMO, and let's say I'm just pink clouding this thing, right? I'm just out there. Is there an opportunity for a CMO right now to actually make a pitch internally that more money should be spent on marketing? Like this is a time like we need to have more asset relocation or assets thrown at us so that we can really take advantage of the competition pulling back on their budgets, pulling back on their spend. How do I frame it as a CMO, or can I even frame it as a CMO, that there's an opportunity here? Or am I just hitting a wall of pragmatism or negativism that's just I can't overcome?
I've lived through a lot of these, and my thing is I don't ask for money unless I know it's going to work.
Okay.
If I know I can take share because people are retreating from the field and I have enough math to prove that, I will use that money. And then, but if the math turns on me, I will give that money back. Because in the end, to me, that's building that infrastructure I talked about in the long run, which is I can get a lot more customers and then retain them in a down market. A good brand can take share. But if the company is under a lot of stress and everything, I'm probably not going to do that because, then I'm double risking things. But I think the point made earlier is also really important is people forget why you actually even win the search box in the first place. And they will cut all that money, and then search 6 months later could be weaker. And if you're not looking at that, you will miss the real reason why consumers aren't there. You will just think, oh my gosh, there's some other reason. But the real reason is you changed the mix and the consumer didn't like it. Anyway, sorry, I went on a little side there.
No, I love it.
I do not. I never go for extra money in a down market unless I have some proven things. I will test in little doses if extra money can take share or build some sales. But I'm probably not asking for a big thing unless I can pretty much tell the company and the board they're going to get something for it.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's fair.
I mean, a way to just a thought to build on that, because I often do that with clients too. It's like, go after things that if you do put money against it, then there's a relatively sure bet that you might get something in return. For instance, if you're in a somewhat commoditized category, solve one really ugly pain point that just nauseates consumers and fix that, because that could work in your favor. Go after a very niche audience that you might not have gone after, that is completely and utterly underserved, but there's a market there. Look at little niche, nitty-gritty things that haven't been resolved and go after that, because that, in fact, could be extra revenue to help your bottom line versus just asking for money. Be very, very razor sharp on what you're going to kind of go after that solves a basic consumer need that hasn't been alleviated.
I like that. And the other thing is go after a small segment you can win, or is now up for grabs.
Exactly.
Because someone has retreated.
Yeah.
Just go take that segment.
Yeah.
Don't try and say I'm going to go win the whole battle for greatness. Give me boatloads of money, because that hardly ever actually works.
Yeah.
Yeah. Don't distort against the wall is what I'm hearing. Don't throw something against the wall to see if it sticks, right? Be like precision weapon.
Precision. No boiling of the ocean. Be very precise. Like many categories have across the experience, very nagging, obvious pain points that we all know what they are, and they kind of get overlooked. Oh God, we don't want to solve one of them, because in many instances, solving one of them can be a game changer in terms of how it's magnified.
Yeah, and as a product marketing leader, I think I'm used to, compared to other functions, having just smaller budgets, just the nature of the work. And I think there's a way to sort of go. You continue to be more aggressive, as everyone's saying here, but you can be aggressive in non-capital intensive ways. That idea of it really just costs headcount and arms and legs and brain power to build out content, to take customer stories and really build a portfolio, even if you're just publishing on first party and selected third party aspects. For every customer story, have the business decision maker story, have architecture diagrams, have all the people that care in a sales cycle, treat them all as first party, treat them all with white glove, in a way that, you're really just utilizing headcount and people that are there inside the business already. So it allows you to go deeper. That idea of program spend, I think you can still be immensely aggressive and effective, and potentially even be a bit more focused as program spend recedes, as long as you have good, smart people in the building who want to go run at this stuff. And I think that, again, I'm used to having relatively small program budgets because we have our arms and legs to do this stuff. And I think maybe now that's a time to sort of woodshed on those types of initiatives,
I
particularly
love
like
you going with that. I love you going with that. It's a time to drive more alignment is what I'm hearing. Is that correct, John? Like go back to sales, go back to the other organizations and figure a way to bring more.
Basically stop boiling the ocean, stop going like an inch deep in everything. If there are 2 or 3 use cases or 2 or 3 markets or 2 or 3 locations where you feel like there's a huge opportunity, blow it out with the people that you have there, blow it out with the existing customers stories that you have. Go get new ones. Go work more closely with the partner ecosystem, who I think are, as kind of the vendor budgets shrink down. Well, that's going to impact sort of the channel and those other folks in the ecosystem. Engage them in a way, maybe with people in the organization who weren't necessarily partner facing or channel facing. These are all sort of creative ways I think people can become really aggressive without necessarily having going back to the CFO and say, hey, I know times are tough, but like you just show up and be like, here's all the stuff we did with, essentially cleaning out the cupboard. And I think that now's a great time for doing that.
Yeah. And can I also ask you this, and then I want everyone to jump in. Is this a good time to drop the feuds? Like if there's been feuding between sales and marketing, if there's been like, is this a good time to say, look, we got to rise above this. We have no choice, right? There's an existential threat here. So am I making sense? Is this a good time to have a kumbaya or to sit down and have a, meeting of mind?
I don't think there's ever a good time to have a feud. So my whole thing
Understood.
But I think the thing and I try not to get in them if I can help them because I think it's not helpful to anybody. It's really not helpful to consumers. I do think the thing here is the more the whole company can focus on its financials and the marketplace math, the better it will be. And if you can get people focused on, look, we're going to hold the share we have and we're going to go take 5%, or we're going to take 5% here, because when the market turns, we will start at a plus 5%. It won't look like 5 when we get it now, but it will when we turn the corner. That is a massive win. Because you are actually taking share in a market where everyone is afraid. But then when the market turns out, you start with that 5% lead, and that is a really big lead. And so I don't think about it as feuding versus I think about it as focus. Like what are we really focused on doing? I think when it becomes a feud is everyone's talking about the money they need for their function versus the money they need for the financials or the money they need for the market. And in the end, those are the two things that have to meet in my mind.
Yeah. Same with me. Focus on the uber ambition, the thought, the goal, the collective perspective, and unite everybody to deliver against that in a very focused, precise way versus, I guess, feuding. I guess it's not going to be productive.
No, agreed. I just meant sometimes there was some institutional feuding going on. Sales is blaming marketing is blaming sales. There's some of that old legacy stuff. And I love where you're going with this. Nelson, being on the agency side, are you noticing, or do you notice in times like this that people really come to you relying on you more for creativity? There's more pressure on you to help them connect dots and move faster and.
Well, it can be a really good time for strategists like me, because I think there's a little bit of a shift from, okay, well, I no longer can outspend, I have to outthink.
Oh, interesting.
So, right. So how am I going to strategically outthink people depending on the situation? And it gets back to being a little bit jujitsu on your category, to my earlier points. If you know your space sufficiently well, then be creative and start doing a little bit of iteration and creative experimentation on a very small scale that might eventually pay off in a big, big way. I'm a big proponent of looking across an experience, and I've looked at so many categories where there are so many little nagging pain points that consumers just find downright annoying that could be easily fixed. That if they get fixed, it's going to be like even the online, offline connection. Like sometimes it's like, oh, I did this offline and then online is a complete difference. Like just fixing basic things that don't cost a lot can make a massive difference on your, ROI. So I tend to like focus on those things that I know we've reminded clients over and over again, and haven't been quite resolved. Another big one, particularly in a world where people want messages very personalized and very individualized, is go after a niche group or a group that's been utterly underserved and just completely ignored, but they want to be part of this, and just, be less mass and more personal also with your messages, I think help.
Nelson, I think you're calling out the customer experience component of this, which I think is really important, because if money is even more dear to me as a consumer, little things may make me shop more in a down market. And all those little things, like, I actually, you promised me this and you didn't deliver it, or you didn't pick up the phone fast enough on the customer call and I'm giving you a lot of money, or you missed some customer experience thing. That will push more people to shop because they are valuing the money maybe more in a down market.
And you know what?
I think that's a big deal.
So many of us spend a lot of time, perhaps less so because there are a lot of privacy issues, giving a lot of information over to organizations. They know a lot about us. Go through your data arsenal, dig out, find fresh insights about your consumers that you could recharge and service them in a new way that, to your point, Mike, is really going to make them feel extra special and they're treated with a little bit like white gloves. Because that, to your point, that's going to make a difference between, oh, you don't care versus, oh, wow, you're being much more personalized and thoughtful and meaningful with what you're giving me. And I'm kind of touched by that. And we know a lot about customers in this day and age where we're all searching for first party data. So use it well, go back into that well and dig through it. And this doesn't cost you anything. It's just better marketing and better communication.
Yeah, go ahead, Mike. I've got to say, I think, and I would encourage companies to think about it not as just marketing, but as the consumer interface.
Exactly.
I think if the marketing is making a promise and the consumer interface isn't delivering it, it's actually double damning for you, because you're setting expectations and then defeating yourself. And I think a lot of companies will get in the space where they will just keep dropping the price, but it's not necessarily the price that is driving the value. It is the total experience that's driving the value. And they are degrading the value while they drop the price, which is sometimes a non-recoverable thing. You will have a low price and a shitty value equation, and that will be really dangerous because it will make it hard to raise the price and hard to get new customers in.
Agree. It's not the answer.
No, it's not the answer, but it could be tempting, right? There's some temptation there, right? You end up in this like fear vortex. I love what you guys also mentioned about like find ways to win, because I'd also imagine that's important for your people. It's important for morale, right? It's not only the story to the marketplace, it's also about the internal stories that are going on, right? How to keep people motivated. And what would you say to CMOs or marketing leaders out there right now, people who are specializing in a craft? How do you lead in times like this? Like, how do you, because you might have to reinvent your leadership role or your leadership style slightly or expand upon it. Any tips or tricks?
I think one of the things Nelson was talking about, I think, and we've all been talking about is what are the things you can utilize, particularly when, access to program dollars may be down. And it's that idea of, hey, all these sort of rainy day or backlog projects around understanding our customers more, or utilizing all this data we've been collecting and normalizing and spending all this vendor dollars on putting in different things. Go do interesting things with it, right? Because I think, and I'm certainly not prognosticating in any way, but like this will turn around quickly. And the war for talent, as we've all seen in marketing across functions, I think this is an opportunity for the folks that sort of stay in the building will emerge with a completely different experience of how they've been empowered, what kind of agency they've been given to go do great marketing. I think honestly, the biggest drag that I've seen in my career on other marketers is they're not allowed to market. They're fighting they're basically fighting together on backfield, or they're doing tactical stuff. Be strategic around a specific vertical, be strategic around a product line that you think there's upside for. And I think this is a time where leaders can, again, kind of, woodshed on that kind of work where maybe things were growing so fast before and you have to go deploy that capital and just deploy those program dollars they wouldn't have had the chance to do.
Yeah.
Anyone else around this? Like, yeah, Mike?
Yeah. So I have 3 rules here. The first is you got to play the hand you're dealt. You can't be whining. So there's only one person that spends the most in the category, or one company that spends the most in the category. Talking about them spending the most is like, it's pointless. You have the hand, you have to play it. The second thing is, I think I always try and have balance between 2 things. One, the short and the long-term tools and the financials the company needs, and the marketplace needs the customer wants. And I try and be in the middle of that. And the third thing is, I think in any marketplace like this, and any time, but especially when you're under pressure, objectivity really matters. And if you try something and it doesn't work, you have to be the first one to shoot it. Because you don't want to be loving your own stuff so much that the company thinks you don't have objectivity. Because you can't run that balance equation between short and long term and talking about the customers and the financials unless a large part of the company thinks you are pretty objective about it. And so and the worst thing I think you can do is go in there and go, Ruben is outspending us 10-1, and there's no way we can compete against him. We need more money, and there's nothing we can do. That is a doom loop, because you're not going to get the money, and Ruben's not going to stop spending. Right. And because Ruben has an edge and he's going to leverage it, you have to play that hand, and you have to tell the company how it's playing out. Anyways, that's how I think about it.
Yeah, look, I'm going to go for final words of wisdom here. What I'm really hearing is it's a great time to get creative. It's a great time to get introspective. It's a great time to focus on empowerment, right? It's a great time to say, play the hand I've got. What resources do I have? What have I overlooked? Take an inventory. What I'm kind of hearing is take an inventory. See where you're at. See what you gathered in data and projects and rethink. Like, what am I trying to say here? I mean, repurpose what you got and keep on playing the game. Is that a fair statement? I mean, just don't give up. Be creative. Keep thinking. Keep trying. Any final words of wisdom? Because a lot of folks right now need, a custom insight or two that can make all the difference in these next 12 to 18 months.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say at this moment in time, adopt a sense of creative experimentation over being transactional, because no one wants to feel that they're being transacted with. To our earlier points, you're just a number. Here it is. Here's a coupon. Here's the price. Come buy it. Blah blah blah. We want to feel like I've given you, hey, company A, I've given you a lot of information about myself. You know me. Give me something that makes me feel like you genuinely care. And that's superseding the transactional to be a little more personal with me, and creatively experiment with a new audience, things that you've put on the backlog, nagging pain points, and really fix those. These don't cost a lot, but they can make a big difference. So I'm a big proponent of creative experimentation and iteration.
I agree with everything Nelson said. And the two things I would add is, if you're a big line item, you should expect the pressure. The idea that you're not going to get pressure, the whole company's, if the marketplace is under pressure and you're a big line item, you're going to be under pressure. And the idea that you're not going to be it, to me, is kind of goofy. Yeah. Because no one's going to give you a big line item and go do whatever you want. But the second piece of advice I'd ladder onto that is, the more you can translate what you're doing into the way the company can hear it, which is almost always financials, long-term or short-term, the better chance you have of the company understanding it. So try not to talk marketing. Try and translate it into something the company can hear. And that's almost always, to me, becomes some kind of financial measure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, to echo what everyone's saying here, I think now's the opportunity to sort of unlock the strategic creativity inside the marketing organization, in people's heads and their arms and legs, to go do stuff to move the ball forward, for customers, to move the ball forward for the ecosystem. And I think that will pay dividends down the line. All of a sudden, allow everybody sort of from a bottoms up standpoint to bring their best during a time when maybe people have this anxiety. Like, think of this as a way to go do the best marketing of our lives.
Love that.